And we are live in the Storycraft Cafe. I am your host, Hank Garner. As always, joining me, my co panelist, Rick Partlow, Josh Hayes. And today we discover what exactly the fox says. Richard Fox joining us as we talk about
A lot of
this.
inappropriate stuff is what he says.
Yes, this will be mildly to wildly inappropriate today. Just go ahead and brace yourselves. Last week we did not meet, and my apologies, but we had a new addition to the family that showed up last week, and so we took the week off. But we are back here now, and we are talking about series. Josh, Rick, and Richard all have series published. I am currently in the middle of writing a series that will begin publishing in a couple of months now. And so I thought this would be a fun topic to tackle. Um, what does it mean to write, edit, and publish a series? Um, Richard, since you're new here, although you've been on the show before, but for this discussion, you're new here. Tell folks,
Rookie.
tell folks, the Terra Nova series, one of my favorite um, sci-fi. I'm trying to figure out which sub genre to label it because it's kind of encompasses a bunch. But tell folks kind
Pterodactyl
of
corn.
who you are, what you
Indeed.
write, and um, just introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Richard Fox. I have written the Ember Wars series along with Terra Nova. We've co-written with Josh Hayes. And I've also written the Exiled Fleet series. And I think I'm up to 52 books now. And I'm co-writing the Ascent to Empire series with David Weber right now. And so I've got, 52 books so far. So almost all of them are written within the scope of a series. So when it comes to writing a series, for me, I need to know what the end state is when I get started. So a lot of times I'll just have this mental image of this is the final scene, and now I know how my characters start. I know how my characters need to get there, and then by and large I kind of know this is going to be a 3-book series. This is a 5-book series. This is a 7-book series, etc., etc. And then knowing which, because every time when it comes to writing the books in the series, I find what really works for me is that each book poses a different question. Like for Terra Nova, the first book happens, and the question is posed as what happened to the original colonists? And then we find out what happens to the original colonists. And then at the end of the book, another question comes up of, well, who were these bad guys connected to? And how do we go and deal with these other bad guys who are now loose? Like, okay. So you get in the second book, you deal with how these bad guys are loose, and it sets up the third book, which is, okay, these bad guys are going to be coming for us. How do we defend ourselves? So each book poses a question that gets answered within that book. And that way, the readers, that way, like, oh, that was satisfying. That way, if you ever end a book on to be continued, people get angry.
Yes.
They for by and large, they get angry because they're expecting some sort of resolution.
Right.
So if you give readers resolution and then pose the next question, they're excited for the next book. So they're both satisfied and eager. And I find that is a good way to keep people coming back to finish the series. And have I ended a book on to be continued before? Yes. And when I was doing the Ember War, which is my first series, which was 9 books, I kind of
just 9
towards
books?
the end, it occurred to me that maybe book 8 and 9 should have been combined, but I didn't, and ended on to be continued. And then anyway, I was a newish author, and I wouldn't do anything like that now. But that was one problem I came up with. And then also sometimes when you're writing a series, you know, I think of it kind of like an accordion. Sometimes you can stretch it out. Some parts you need to change to compress it to make it a little bit different. And you need to have a little bit of wiggle room in there to know, okay, we can expand on this because the readers really like it and I really like it too.
Yeah.
And then also sometimes like, oh, you know what, maybe that plot line we had isn't as necessary, and we can resolve that within another book. So it's good to be flexible, and ultimately you have to do what's good for the story, and what's going to be good for the story is what's entertaining for the reader. I've always found.
So when you begin a series, you have an end point in mind, and you're
Yes,
writing toward that end point.
yes.
Um, Rick, do you think in terms of an end point for a series when you begin? Because
Almost never.
I was about to say with Drop Trooper, there's kind of no end point. Or it seems that it just
I
keeps.
think I think in 3 book story arcs when I do a
Okay.
series. I do a 3 book arc and I have an idea where the third book is going to end up, but that's not necessarily going to be an end of the series. There's exceptions to that. There's this, when I know I'm writing just a trilogy and
Yeah.
it's not going to be anything else, and that's few and far between nowadays, but um, I know where I'm going to be at the end of the third book, and since I'm not planning on writing anymore, that's going to be the end. But everything else, I look at where the third book's going to end, and I try to make room at the end of the third book to do more stuff with those people. It used to be, however, back before I started outlining everything, that I just take every book one at a time.
So, it, in thinking in those terms of a trilogy at a time, um, you and Richard are essentially talking about the same thing. There's
So
a
Maddie left.
Richard got so mad that he just dropped out. Um,
I'm back.
that
I don't know what happened there.
it's all
Camera doesn't
right.
like.
We'll give you grace. And he leaves again. Um,
I don't want your
do
grace, damn it.
and he's back. Um,
Sorry, wires.
Josh, what do you think in terms of a series? Are you thinking about an endpoint, or are you thinking like Rick does at an end point for now?
Yeah. First, I just want to mention that Richard mentioned me first and David Weber second. I think that's subliminally that counts for something.
Well, I think that's the correct hierarchy.
But for sure,
Yeah.
I think in kind of a hybrid way. Like I have an idea of what I want the series to do,
Yeah.
and then I break that down into smaller parts, and a lot of times those will become the individual stories for each book. Um, but then other times I kind of do what Rick does in that I think of a major problem that they can tackle over the course of 1 or 2 or 3 books. And in Terra Nova, we originally had 5 books planned, and then we squished it into 4 because we didn't want fluff in book 4. And we felt that we had done everything that we needed to get to the characters to where we wanted them to be at the end,
Mm-hmm.
and then there was not enough to stretch. And so we cut out actually a lot, like a huge subplot that we had planned, that was going to be book 4, and then that would lead into book 5, but we ended up not really needing it. And so instead of just writing a whole book that we didn't really need, we just kind of shrank it down and combined 4 and 5. In the Valor series, I only had 1 book planned, and then I had to like manipulate that plot into 3, and that worked out. With Weaponized, I don't really have a broad series scope, because what I want to try to do with this is create a almost like a universe like the Mission Impossible movies, like 3, 4, 5, and 6, not 1 and 2. Those are good movies, but I'm specifically thinking about these other ones because they kind of start a different kind of path for the
Right.
show. And so what I want to do is create individual things for each book, and then have subplots that kind of interweave between the books. I don't necessarily want to write standalones, but I want to write them as close to standalones as possible. So you can come in kind of like if you read like Orphan X or The Gray Man or any of those books, you can pick up any of those books essentially and read them as the first book.
Yeah.
And you don't miss anything from the first book. The only caveat to Weaponized is 1 and 2 flow directly together. Just because of the nature of those two books. But then 3 and hopefully 4, 5, and 6, if I get to do those other books, those will have individual problems for that book. And all of those, most of them will be wrapped up per book, and then we'll jump to the next one and the next one.
The series that I'm writing is a prequel series to another book that I had written and published a few years ago, and that book has a definitive end. So the story can't go past that book, but there's lots of room on the front end to write prequels and to have all sorts of other adventures, if you will. So that kind of leaves things open ended. But Richard, when you're talking about writing a series that with a definitive end in mind, what happens when you get to the end of that and you think of other places that you'd like to take the story? I mean, you've written spin-off series and stuff. Do you start thinking in those sorts of terms?
It's while I'm writing a series, I'll have other ideas for where the story can go. And what I did with the Ember Wars, I wrote myself a couple little trapdoors that I could just jump down into if I needed to. Like I mentioned, Hale going to Terra Nova.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, when naturally people were like, oh, what would happen to Hale when he went to Terra Nova? Boom, here's your series.
Nothing good.
Yeah. And that's called drama. And and then also it's like, hey, I put in a couple lines about we lost contact with these very influential characters, and we don't know what happened to them. And the readers are like, well, what happened to them? And then so now you have other series that go back and address that. So and like the series I'm writing right now is finishing up. It's called The Tier, and there's going to be a couple little lines in there that while book 3 is the end for this trilogy. I could come back and do something else with it later. I mean, the interest is there. Characters, readers may be like, "Oh, that's fun." So it's kind of good to just plant a couple little trapdoors for yourself, and but nothing too major. Like one of the protagonists' close friends vanishes, and I'm like, "Where'd it go?" And you just never address it. I mean, you need to have the ending still needs to be satisfying, but also
you don't want to pull a Lost.
No.
Yeah.
Where nothing is explained. Everyone's like, we need to go back and no. So it's that fine line between good happy ending and hey, I wonder what's next. I mean, even with Return of the Jedi, there's a question is, well, what does Luke do now? And we never got that. So, but
it's interesting. One of my favorites space opera authors is Peter F. Hamilton, and he writes amazing books, amazing. And it's funny when Richard says don't end on a cliffhanger. I think the best 2 books he's ever written, the first book ends on a literal cliffhanger with them going over a waterfall in a boat and the character goes, oh shit. And that's the book. It ends.
It's not a cliffhanger, that's a waterfall.
It's a waterfall. But then one of his most recent series, Salvation, is a trilogy. Those books don't end on cliffhangers. But the entire point of this series was, I think that the main alien was the god at the end of time, and the whole trilogy I felt was building up to go and confront this god at the end of time that these aliens were basically destroying every civilization to get to. And the end of the series literally ends with them launching into hyperspace to go meet the god at the end of time. And I'm like, that was the whole point of the series. How are you going to end book 3 on that? Like, it's like all of the books were a subplot prelude to this. And I'm like, now we're there and it's over.
Who was this, Josh?
Peter F. Hamilton.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Maybe he got tired of wrapping up everything in his books.
Yeah.
Do you ever get to the end of a series and not feel satisfied that the journey has not, that the end has not lived up to the journey? I guess what I'm really asking is how do you how do you know that this series is finished, that you've delivered on the promise that you set out for the reader in the beginning? A lot of times the subplots and the side adventures are maybe more exciting than the end game. How do you land the ending?
Well, I think it's like that Supreme Court justice when they ask him to define pornography, and he said, I can't define it, but I know it when I see it." Well, if you stuck the landing, if you've gotten the good ending, you'll know it. You'll feel it. When you type the last words, you'll think, well, that's a good way to end this. And if you didn't, then it's just going to be, kind of, it's all right. Um, I feel like the best ending to a series that I've ever done is probably Wholesale Slaughter, book 6. Because when I ended that at book 6, it just seemed like it was an Ouroboros, a snake with its, tail in its mouth. The whole thing just came
Right.
back around to the beginning and tied everything together, and I felt very satisfied. And if you just kind of ended it, then that's what you feel. You feel like you just ended it.
It's kind of tough in our space, especially if you don't like if you have a plan for a trilogy, usually you can pull that off. But if you've got a plan that spans, 6 or 7 or 8 books, you might not be able to get there because if the books don't sell, you've got to shift into something else. And so the ending that you had planned might not be fully realized for you, but it might be for the reader if you can work that in. So it's like for Richard, his 9-book series I thought ended phenomenally well. The first Ember War series, it was a
Mhm.
great lead up. The ending was a massive, massive battle, bigger and that's the thing with series is a lot of times you've got to ramp it up. And I'm sorry about my camera focusing. I'm not sure why it's flickering, but you've got to like ramp it up. Like every book's got to be a ramp up or something new. And so the longer you go on in the series, the harder that becomes to make the stakes. Because if you have every book that's a world ending thing, that's going to get very old. And then it's not going to, they're like, yeah, okay, the world's ending. They're going to save it. So you've got to be careful to meter that. But then if you have the opportunity to write a 9-book series, you get to book 9 and it ends like in a, I don't know, a quick draw match on the streets of somewhere. Is that enough of a climactic ending to cap a series? And that's really tough sometimes when you're
Or for
looking at,
Justified.
yeah, or for right, right. And maybe that particular instance is like the ultimate, and he finally meets the big bad and he has a battle. But um those satisfying endings can be really tricky sometimes depending on what you're doing and how you're doing it.
That's why I like to have the end state in mind. And if I have that final scene of, okay, the characters are sitting around figuring out what they're going to do next after the battle's complete, then okay, the main conflict for the series has been resolved. And for the Emerald War, the question is, how do we survive against this invading the Zaros, or this uh, Kardashev type 2 civilization? How do we survive against that? And get to the end of the Emerald War, like, okay, we got that. Boom. The big question has been answered, so everything is satisfying. Most everyone survives, and then there's a couple the little issues that maybe the reader wants to know about in spin-off series, but otherwise the reader can get to the end of the series and go, I feel good about that. Yay. And then they can go off and come back to another series that I've written.
So with the War, for example, originally it was 9 books. Do you, when you're planning those out, are you thinking about a large overarching problem that needs to be solved, and then the smaller problems along the way? Do you kind of start thinking in those sorts of terms for how how this big story is going to break into pieces?
A lot of times it'll just be when I'm outlining the series, it'll just be like one sentence of, the good guys retrieve an artifact that they needed. And then during the Ember War, there was a couple times where, like when I was writing the second book, the only antagonist force was supposed to be the Zarros drones flying around the planet. And I realized that's kind of boring. Let's introduce some other characters, some other bad guy characters. And we got the Toth, who, eat brains, show up. And the Toth had come out from this other idea I had that I just had in my notes called Free the Farm. And what that idea had was this special forces team goes to a planet and finds a bunch of humans who are being raised as cattle, essentially, and they don't know that they're being raised as cattle. And that idea I had became the Gardens of Nibiru, which was like book 5 or 6.
Such a great book. That was one of my favorite books.
Everyone loves that book. I'm surprised because I like this seems a little out of place, but people really liked it. So, and
the first time the Space Marine gets the thing into his head, I'm like, oh, this book's gonna be glorious.
Yeah. Did somebody say they sucked out his brain?
Yeah,
they did.
Yes,
when I was writing the second book, we had giant crystal jellyfish and brain-eating aliens, and the readers were like, "Gore!" I'm like, "Okay, I didn't think that was going to fly." Right. Who am I to argue with my audience? Okay.
You cannot.
Yeah, but it was kind of like, okay, this kind of works to have this almost a side story within the whole overarching narrative, because and the reason it didn't become just a total fluff side story was because we said we need the people who are on that planet because they know how to program this other thing that we need. So that's like, oh, we do need them. Oh, now there's a story reason to go there. Now there's actual motivations for the plot. It's not just, hey, everybody wake up, get in the boat, we're going. And then no one kind of knows where they're going or what they're doing. So it was.
Why are we going there? Because there's stuff that sucks out people's brains. It's cool.
No, there's a story reason for it. Oh, good. There's motivations for everything that happens. So it was good to be able to find those motivations.
So let me envision this. When you're first thinking about the Ember War, you've got this big overarching problem, and you lay out one sentence, reasons for each book, that this is the thing that we need to solve. And then you go back and figure out how to make that happen. Am I following you?
Right. So if I know in book 6 that they have to go and get this artifact from this ancient alien space station, then, okay, well, I need to set up in books earlier that there is one of these ancient aliens who have this technology that they're going to go need later. So if you plant those story seeds, the readers, they'll just get through that whole paragraph or wherever I set that up. It'll just gloss over it. And then when you get to that book, they're like, oh, yeah, he did set that is something we need. And the reader feels like they've realized it the whole time. And meanwhile, I'm,
right,
pulling the strings there kind of thing. So, but it's, setting up the story seeds for the reasons for later books is, I find that's really helpful.
So do you, when do you do a fleshed out outline of the story? Is it when you get to that book, to the writing of that book? Or is there after you do the one sentence breakdowns, do you then go back and flesh those out, or do you wait until you get to the writing of that book to figure out the specifics?
Normally what I do is I'll write down the whole series outline, and I know this is what happens in book 1, book 2, and book 3. And then I'll fully flesh out the outline for book 1. And Josh, he once got a 15-page outline from me for Terra Nova book 1. And
it was like 14,000 words.
It was a good outline. It was a good outline. And then I'll look at that outline. And I think, okay, what do I have to establish for books 2 and 3? Right. And then I'll stop. I'm like, okay, if I know in book 2 they're going to go to the crystal planet, like, okay, we need some little breadcrumbs to put into book 1, and I'll put those breadcrumbs in there. And then I look, okay, what happens in book 3? And I think, okay, what do I have to do in book 2 that sets up book 3? And then what kind of hints can I put in book 1 that makes book 3 logical? And go through and add those in there. And then all of a sudden, now book 2 becomes a lot more natural when it's time to get to that. I'm not like starting from scratch again. So I know everything I have to set up, everything I have to pay off, everything that, was, there before that, like the Chekhov's guns.
Right.
That I've given to the readers to know that at some point that's going to go off. So it's that's normally just how I work. Is like, okay, I know all the things that are going to happen here, and like with the tier books that I'm writing right now, there's a bit of a plot device to make the bad guys less violent, and that was, it seems like it's extraneous information in book 1, and then book 2, it's like the reader should get the idea of, hey, they could use these things to stop the bad guys, and then in book 3, oh, guess what? The bad guys get a good dose of the stuff that makes them less violent. So,
As an aside, some science fiction writers should put a weapon on one of their spaceships called the Chekhov gun.
I think that's a
Like to
gift
see that.
specifically for you, Rick. I think you should do that.
little on the nose, but I think it could work.
But yeah, I think a lot of folks will appreciate that. Josh has shared with us that in his current series that he's writing, that when dealing with book 2, he started realizing some things about book 1, and because he had not published yet, he could go back and he could make some changes. Does that sort of thing ever happen to you, Richard or Rick, where in the writing of one book you start new possibilities are opening up, and maybe you don't have the opportunity to go back and change a book that's already been published, but does that alter your future outline for your series?
Well, yeah, definitely a future. I have my publishing schedule tends to be a bit too hectic usually for going back and changing the first book.
Yeah, I think every 3 days I get an email from Amazon. Your friend Rick Partlow has a new book published.
Well, but it definitely, I will when I'm planning out a series,
Yeah.
I will make descriptions like synopsis of the next. I don't do full outline of book 2 or book 3 until I get to it, because something's going to happen in book 1 that's going to change that outline, because I always wind up having that happen, that something feels natural to happen in the first book and then you got to change the second book. So I don't bother writing a full outline until after I finished the first one, or the next one. But I've had several times where something that came up in one book just totally changes how I want to take the series, and gives me a hint to what's going to happen in the future. Sometimes, I don't know if Richard ever does this, but I will have a plan for the next few books, and I'll start actually writing the first book in that arc, and I'll realize there's too much filler in this outline. I need to do something more important with this book, so it doesn't feel like to the reader like it's just filler. That they could have skipped it. So I'll just something really important from the next book and just plop it right down the middle of this one, which means at some point I got to come up with something to write in the next book, because it totally throws off the ideas I have for the rest of the series. But I feel like it's worth it. You've got to make every book have something important in it that people are going to feel like it was worth reading, that's not one you can just skip in the series.
I've done that.
Yeah, it's normally I come all across and I find more story that can be told, like with the Ember War. So I introduced the Toth through these bad guys in the second book, and they were great bad guys. And I'm thinking, and then also it kind of brings out the problem, because the Toth find something they really want from humans, and then that ends up becoming the book Earth Defiant, where the Toth attack Earth because they want the certain technology. Could have not had that at all, but I was sitting there going, this is fun. Yeah. And then also it kind of leads into one of the subplots of, well, how is Earth going to survive the Zaros? Well, they have to make what they're called procedurals. They're not clones, but they're flash grown humans. And then I love the story and ethical and implications of, well, now we have a whole flash grown population. Are they real people? Are they not? And then what's all the implications of this? And so that was like, I could explore this kind of question in the face during an alien invasion. And somehow I pulled it off pretty well, I think. So, and sometimes you come across a series like, well, this is fun, and it works towards the overarching questions of, within the series. And that if it works, it works. But, sometimes I think if there's action involved in a series, then the reader typically will not think it's fluff. If you have a book where everyone just kind of walking around talking about the problem, and never actually solving the problem, the readers are going to be going, doing. So,
Right.
but I think if you have enough action, typically the readers won't think it's just fluff.
Something I've been thinking a lot about lately is theme. And I don't normally think about theme at all um, until the book is finished, and then you read back over it, and I start realizing that these themes are kind of floating to the surface. Like, oh, I must have really been thinking about this, or it's kind of a subconscious thing that just kind of works its way out in my writing. Do you guys think about theme, or is there ever? I don't want to use the word agenda because that's not what I mean. But is there ever an idea that you're wrestling with, or that you really want to find a great way to talk about, and story is a great way to couch um, these things that you're thinking about? Do you guys think about that at all? Does that ever come up to you?
I uh, so it's not technically a theme for
Yeah.
the first weaponized book, but it was an idea. In the Valor series, there was a big, like, galaxy-wide conspiracy that was going on, and they had to figure it out. In Terra Nova, it was just survival and learning how to live in a different galaxy and all of that. And so for this, for weaponized, I wanted to look at unintentional consequences. And so instead of having a big conspiracy that went up through the levels of government and all that, um, it was the whole impetus for the series, or the book one, is basically greed, and the person behind it all, quote unquote, didn't mean for any of it to happen.
Mm.
And he has no idea really that his actions are what caused everything to happen. And um, the characters, though, and that guy is kind of like off screen. He's not really antagonist. He's just the insider, inciter, and regardless of whether or not he actually wanted to do it or not, his actions had pretty significant consequences for our main characters and his friends. And so then we look at, what's justice for that? Like, is that something that, it's not like he's a big bad guy where he's ruining the universe and we've got to go just blast him away and kill him, right? That, what do we do when we find out that his actions weren't sinister, they weren't malicious, it was just, he's just greedy, like he's bad, he's a bad guy, he's not a great dude, he's doing stuff under the table, he's doing stuff kind of on the backhand of the law, kind of like politicians do now, where they do shady shit, and everybody just kind of turns a blind eye, but they're not killing anybody. They're, if we don't talk about like sending
Sometimes.
soldiers, well, I'm not talking about, sending military overseas and stuff like that. I'm talking about just, insider trading, that kind of thing. Like
Right.
that kind of where they say victimless crime, or they're never going to get, in trouble for it or whatever. Some of those things have unintended consequences, and so I kind of wanted to explore what those consequences could be, and then what's the how do we fix it?
I tend to get the theme after I get the story. I'll come up with the story idea first, and
Yeah.
then after I get the story and I get the characters, they come together, and I'll realize after I've written like that synopsis, hey, there's a theme there somewhere. I didn't realize. Like for instance, Glory Boy, one of my earliest,
Yeah.
successful novels. I knew what the story was going to be about. It's a kid who's from a planet, a pacifist who has to go off to war. And that's a theme in itself. But really, I found out as I wrote the book that the theme was faith, and whether he could keep his faith in the face of all that he's had to do and what he's become. And like the theme of the Birthright novel that came after that. I didn't realize it at the time because I was just writing stuff that was cool, but it was, how do you define humanity? What if you're part machine, if you're more machine than human, are you still a human being? Do you still qualify to fit in with the rest of human beings, or have you turned into something different? And that just happened to be how it came together. But I never go in designing a story or characters for a certain theme. I just let the theme kind of come out of the stew.
Yeah, for me, I'll have like just like a one sentence thought of what the theme is. Like for the Ember War, it's all about survival, and for the Queen of Sidonia book, it's all about duty over desire. So I just have that. It's in the back of my head. I kind of know what it's about, and then the whole rest of the story plays out, and it's never like I have to drive this home. That never really happens for me?
Right. If you have theme too early in the story, do you feel like that comes across as preachy, like that your story has some sort of subliminal purpose that turns readers off? I guess what I can't think in terms like that because that's not how I write. And if I had something that I was trying to get across to the reader, it would seem to me like it would come across very heavy-handed. Do you guys have thoughts about that?
I think it's very easy to want to do that in your writing if you're very opinionated and you want to get your own thoughts across. It's very easy to do that, but it's
The
also
one thing about
very
this group, there are no hard opinions. I know
right.
that.
No, we're very blasé.
Right.
But the problem there becomes the readers see it too.
Yeah.
It's interesting though that like I got a review on Audible the other day on Valor, and the review really, I mean, it was a bad review, obviously, and I love reading bad reviews because just sometimes they just are crazy.
Yeah.
This
fun.
guy, I mean, Rick gets it too, where people call him a liberal or progressive or whatever. But so this review was
I'm
titled,
so liberal.
yeah,
Which is hilarious, by
yeah.
the way.
This review is titled Benghazi Fetishing. This book is just conservative persecution fetish masturbation material. Recommend if that's your thing. If not, leave this one to the subjects of that regime.
My persecution fetish.
Yeah, I
Persecute
was
me,
like,
baby.
I was like trying to figure out like how anything in that book came off as that, because there was really no politics in the book.
Right.
It's basically a measure of duty, and that's the question of is it duty or moral, or orders, or and so it was odd that I didn't intend to write a theme, but people pulled that out of it. But I think if you go in purposely for it, you can very easily turn to preaching. And no one wants to be preached to ever, regardless of whichever the side. And then you run the risk of turning people off on purpose.
Right.
People that don't agree with what you're saying or whatever. I read a lot of authors that, like, personally, I don't agree with their politics or their beliefs or whatever, but they are good writers and they write good books and good stories. And I love reading those stories, and I don't base the stories off of that. But if you start preaching themes, especially if it's from your point of view, you turn off a whole readership. I believe personally, if you're going to look at a theme, look at it from both angles and then present it adequately from both angles. If you can have a character that maybe sides with your opinion, that's fine, but write one that doesn't, and then do a good job of writing that opposite viewpoint so that you're not making that opposite viewpoint character look like an idiot, right?
Yeah.
Like actually make that character smart. And yeah, if you're going to do it that way, then yes, I could see. But I mean, a lot of books really don't need that. If you're just looking to tell an entertaining story, theme can come out naturally. But yeah,
An author that does a pretty good job of that I think is Brandon Sanderson, who sets out to have characters that he knows personally nothing about their life, and tries to get in their head. And I've always appreciated just the way he can try to explore this character and humanize them, if you will, even if they have a wildly different worldview than he does.
For
And
sure.
I think that's fun to try to explore if you can. What about how do you know when a series has reached its expiration date? I can think of a number of series
When
that
people
might
stop
still.
buying it.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Well, I think there are a number of series that still sell books, but they're not good anymore. Um,
Mm.
so how do you balance um, the
My
fact
checkbook.
that I could keep churning these out and selling them, versus they're just not good anymore. Like
It's your job to
when
make them good. I mean,
yeah,
you know, if you're, I'll give you an example of Drop
okay,
Trooper. I had intended that to be a 4 book series. Actually, originally 3 books, trilogy, and it wound up expanding to 4 to end the war. And then my publisher came to me and said, "Hey, you got to write more of these." But the war ends in book 4. What am I going to do? You have to come
right,
up with something. You have to come up with a way to write good books. And if you can't write good books in that series, I mean, that's really your failings as a writer, not any weakness of the novel or of the plot. Because you can make a good book with those characters. If you did originally, you can come up with something new for them to do. That's on you. You gotta. It's not the fault of the the characters or the plot. You've got to do that.
Yeah, and not to be cliche, but if they say no tears in the author, no tears in the reader, and so if you as the author are getting to the point where like, ah, then that's going to carry through to the story, and then the readers will be like, you have wasted my time with a story that is meh. Readers can tell when authors are phoning it in, and so I think it's important to have that. If you got your plan, if you planned out your series right, and every single book's going to hit some really good emotional notes, keep on going. But if you're ever at the point like, oh god, 3 more of these, um, you probably need to find a way to wrap it up sooner than
My
later.
my advice is if you have an idea for another series with another theme that you want to work on, there is no reason you can't take all those themes and all that stuff and put it in the series that's successful and just change the direction and make those characters do the things that these other characters were going to do. Because I've done that with Drop Trooper. I was like, I want to work on this other series with this storyline. Well, these guys can do that. There's no reason that they can't experience that and react to it. And so,
Series and setting is all window dressing, right? Like the story is the story,
yeah,
and
right.
you can do that almost with anything, with any character in any setting. You can take any story, any plot device you want, and put it wherever you want it. If you've got an established series or you want to do something new, I think though that with some series, speaking of where do you know that you're going to end it, sometimes the characters dictate that. And what I mean by that is, David Weber is a friend of mine. He's a great author. He's been doing it for 30, 40 years or something like that.
Yeah,
And he pumps out these tomes of books, right? His Honor Harrington character has promoted to like fleet admiral or something like that. And there's really nothing cool you can do with a fleet admiral. They're sitting behind their desk moving things around.
right.
And so
Don't
the
tell me about
writing is still fantastic. The stories are still there, but the main character that the audience is latching onto, they're not having the same reaction to Honor that they were in, book 7 through 8, when she was
it.
out
Right.
doing captain things and she was out exploring and doing different things. So, you contrast that to, I mentioned the Gray Man before, but the Gray Man he doesn't age. Like the
Right.
time is not progressive. And so in that aspect, the character will not dictate the end of the series. The reader will, or maybe the author will, but that theoretically could go on forever. Whereas in the Honorverse, with Honor specifically, she has promoted and grown out of some of the things that we really loved the series for. And so in that aspect, you need to either do something new or find another character in that series that is in the position of captain or a lower ranking officer that can go and do all these fun things that you were doing before. Switch that perspective and make them the main character. And so then if you want to continue in that, so, or, people do kids all the time.
I ran
kids
into that problem, and I promoted my character too much to do that stuff. But instead of going to another character, I just like brought down the government and threw him into like a rebellion where he didn't have any choice but to fight.
Right.
So I could see like if Honor Harrington was an admiral, and then there's like a coup, and other rebel officers try to take over, forces her into action again, something like
For
that.
sure. Yeah.
Even Tom Clancy dealt with that. Once you've made Jack Ryan president of the United States,
yeah.
What are you going to do?
Then he goes out and watches the anti-missile weapons shooting down Chinese ICBMs.
Right.
He's definitely not going to be stopping terrorists in London.
Maybe on Air Force One.
But
that's true. That's true.
One thing that Tom Clancy always had for him is you would be 400 pages in and he's still introducing characters. He never had a shortage of characters.
Talk about a series that needs to end. The Tom Clancy universe.
Yeah.
The Mark
when
Cameron's
the
latest
dies, maybe
he's dead.
Yeah.
He's still putting out books. You gotta admire that work ethic.
The problem is that Clancy name still sells books.
The Clancy name still sells books. There are good books that are not written by Clancy. But I think now they're kind of getting to a point where they're not really paying attention to story or character development or really anything like that. They're just banking on the name selling books as a business, right? And so then you look at it, and from a reader standpoint, even from an author standpoint, you're like, maybe you should do something else. Maybe.
The thing about Tom
we're
Clancy,
definitely living in the age of franchise authors, and
100%.
a number of authors have passed on, and new writers come in and take up the banner and just keep charging forward. And sometimes that's an okay thing, and sometimes, like you said, we need to appreciate the things that this author gave us and find something new.
Yeah,
sure.
I mean, when readers go and they see Tom Clancy's name on a book, they know it's going to be a Tom Clancy book. So that's really, it's kind of that's the mark. It's the branding now.
Yeah,
it's a Tom Clancy sort of book, and then look, there you go. And then, I mean, even if who's the guy that did the Da Vinci Code? Dan Brown.
Dan Brown.
I mean, if you could just say it's a Dan Brown book. It doesn't matter if it's written by him or not, but if you know it's probably that kind of story structure, that kind of background, that kind of awful prose, Dan Brown.
I will say though, just really quickly on the mention of series and Tom Clancy, you look at the branding of Tom Clancy and you're like, oh, it's a Tom Clancy book. But the books that are post Clancy are not by the letter of Clancyism Tom Clancy books, because the way he wrote is not mirrored in the subsequent books. It's just not. And like Mark Cameron's book, if it wasn't a Jack Ryan book, probably would have been a much better book had it not been a Jack Ryan book. The Red Winter book that just came out, I read that. Red Winter, if it would have just been on its own, would have been a great book. Kind of like the Gray Man movie on Netflix. If it hadn't been the Gray Man, it would have been a phenomenal. It was still a good movie, but it would have been a phenomenal movie just on its own. And I think they do that a lot with franchising and story, where they take the name, and it's like the Jack Ryan series on Amazon. It's not Jack Ryan. You like
Jack Ryan, right?
It's
good, but
it's good. But I think if they would have done it without the Jack Ryan moniker, if they just would have done a terrorism spy series, I think the reception would have been way better than what it was when it released.
Well, here's one way to judge it. If you can go to the bookstore and you can pick up a book that has Tom Clancy's name on it and it's 375 pages, it's not a
Not
Tom Clancy
Clancy,
book.
right?
It's
Right.
not a Clancy book. No, I'm
I will
sorry.
say though,
It's not.
Picard season 3. I know Richard's gonna argue with me on this. Picard season 3 is some of the best Star Trek. If you take out season 1 and season 2, and Picard season 3, Richard's looking for something to throw across the camera. It's like for me, it's like
He's gonna
the Next
FedEx a
Generation
rock
8.
to you.
And so that's actually a really good segue to say, if you've got characters that are now getting older and they're doing different things, putting him into a different situation, I think they did that really well. And then you can bring other characters back as cameos or memorable characters, like Standish in the Ember War. He can come back and he can do different things. And when he comes back, people are like, oh yeah, Standish is back. I love it. And you could do that with longer series too, when you're bringing in characters like that.
One series that I'm baffled by, and the fan reception of, is the Wheel of Time. And Josh and I have had many conversations about the Wheel of Time. I don't understand it. I I think that the biggest thing that I don't understand is its fandom. Because there are a series of books in the middle of the series that everyone calls like the slog or something like that, like a very derogatory name.
I never got past the slog.
I never got to the slog.
We never even we didn't even get through book 2.
No, no.
I got to book 5, I think, and then I was like, I can't take this anymore.
I don't understand what I don't understand is people say you just need to make it through the slog to get to this massive, glorious ending.
To get to Brandon Sanderson.
which Brandon Sanderson wrote, with Robert Jordan's notes, and it's a very storied story. But anyway, why did people stick through books that they did not like? I guess what I'm asking, did the author make a promise up front that the readers believed he would deliver on?
So I've got a thought about that really quickly.
Okay.
Because I when I tell people to read the Way of Kings, which is Sanderson's Stormlight Archive book 1,
Right.
I tell them you have to get through like the first 15% of the book, 20% of the book, because then it becomes amazing. So, but I say that in readers such as the Wheel of Time or in Sanderson's series themselves, Sanderson has promised and delivered to his readers so many times that the slog doesn't matter, because they know by the time they get to the end, all of those payoffs are going to be fulfilled, and they're going to have a emotional ending that is great. And, they're going to get closure, all of that stuff. So I guess in the Wheel of Time, it could be something similar. I never enjoyed it, but if you know through experience that Robert Jordan or Brandon Sanderson can end a book, then I think that you're more apt to get through the slog to get to the ending. But again, that's it takes a really skilled author, and it takes a history of proving that you can do it to be able to drag those readers through the slog.
Well, this is what I don't understand is some of those books in the middle, that and I'm quoting the fandom here. This is not my opinion because I haven't read them.
Write it down.
But the fans talked about how horrible these books are. I mean, they literally call them the slog. Yet they sold more copies than the previous books had. I think, and I may not have this right, but I think when you got to the slog era, though that's when they started topping the New York Times bestseller list and setting all of these sales records, when the people buying and reading them did not like them,
Yeah.
yet they kept selling more and more.
It's kind of
don't
like David
understand
Duffy.
it. Yeah, this just it defies logic. I don't get it.
David Duffy's an insider joke because he's read significantly a significant portion of all of our books and
And giving
hates
them bad
almost
reviews.
every single one of them. You could look through every Ember War book, every Valor book, almost every one of Rick's books, and you will find a David Duffy review. It's usually a 2 or a 3, sometimes a 1 star. Very rarely he'll give a 5 star or a 4 star, but usually it's this writing is so amateurish and the plot is stupid and it goes all over. But then he'll buy the next book and he'll read it. And I'm like, what are you doing, man? If you don't like the books, don't read them. Like, it's as simple as that.
I would say I haven't seen any of his in a while. Have you, Richard?
Oh, I got one from him not too long ago. So.
Oh, okay, good. I thought he might have died.
Yeah. But I got a 4-star review from him once, and I was concerned. I'm like, oh crap, everyone's gonna think I'm him.
Yeah.
It's but when it comes to slogs, I think the reason the way readers will still stick with it is the readers really care about the characters.
Yeah.
And they really want to know what happens to so and so. And like I just read The End and the Death, which is the first of the last 2 Horus Heresy books in the Warhammer 40,000. And people have been waiting for this last chapter of the whole Horus Heresy story for 20-ish years. And then we get to the End of the Death, and everyone's thinking we're going to get one of the big battles. We're going to get Sanguinius and Horus. We're going to get something else. And we didn't. And I was a little upset because I'm like, come on, give me something here. I mean, the last book we had Sanguinius taking down Angron and that one corn demon whose name I can't remember. And like, that was great. We love that. And then it's like, where's the big fight that we were expecting? But am I going to buy the next book? Absolutely. Because that should be the last book. We finally know what happens with Horus and the Emperor and Sanguinius, and there's all these theories going on. Like we want the answers. So, as the people, if people are connected to the characters, they'll stick through the slog. And I think sometimes the reason there is a slog is because publishers may go to that author and say, we're selling too many of these books. You can't stop it.
Yeah.
We need 3 more, and we will give you money.
Yeah.
So much money to keep writing. And then the author's like, I like money. And they're all right. We'll make it 3 more books somehow.
I would really like
the slog in the Wheel of Time. I liked some of the characters, and that's the reason I stuck with it as long as I did. And as the books went on, I found myself skipping parts that dealt with certain parts of the story to get to the characters I liked. And as the books went on, I was skipping more and more. And you're paying like $20-some for a hardback as it comes out, and you're skipping more than half the book. It's like, nah, I'm not going to do this anymore. That's why I quit.
I want to get to a point where the publishers are giving me truckloads of money, but I don't actually have to write a book. Like if I get to Martin's level or Rothfuss's level, and like just tell everyone, oh, it's coming. I'll give you a preview chapter if you give to my charity, and then ever do it. And then I could just get a whole bunch of money.
Does anybody believe that Rothfuss series will ever end?
No.
He's had 10 years to write one book. Come on, man. Even at 500 words a day, which you could do in 5, 10, 20 minutes. 10 year, come on now.
Martin's never going to write another book in that series.
Yeah, I can almost guarantee that publishers have sat around and said, we need to keep them poor. Because if they have money, they'll stop working.
Right.
Well, I mean, Martin's not poor. He's got a TV series,
Martin has so much money that he bought the house across from where he lives just to put his miniatures.
Yeah.
So
that's what I want.
Yeah, I mean, I've got miniatures too, but I don't know if I need a house for them. But yeah,
I want to, and then I'll never go over there because I can't. you see my walls are covered because I literally cannot put any of my stuff anywhere else in the house because my wife is like, no, that's not going anywhere. I just want to buy a house and then fill the entire house with this just so she can't tell me no.
You keep that nerd stuff across the street.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
I'll be in my mansion, honey. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then when I get in trouble, I have to sleep on the couch. I have a whole other house I can go to. I'll sleep on the couch over there.
Forget that cave nonsense.
Right.
Yeah, right.
I'll sleep in the California King I have over there.
Yeah.
Well, guys, that is our time for today. Richard, since you are our guest this week, tell folks where they can find all your stuff. And do you have a new release? What's the latest on your release calendar?
Oh, so next thing that's releasing is the audiobook for Tier Book 2, read by R.C. Bray. That will be out next month. And then the final Tier book will be out in May. And then in December, I have my first story standalone book with Bane that will be published. Right now, the title is The Shattered Star Legacy. Book 1 is Light of the Veil, and I got to do Recover Reveal for that pretty soon.
Oh, nice.
And and then there's just that's what's on the short term. If you can find me on Amazon, just type in Richard Fox. I suggest starting with the Ember War or Albion Lost, which is that series has been optioned for TV development, and so that maybe we'll see something for that in the next year or two. And or always you read Terra Nova, written by me and Josh Hayes. That's a great story. Stands alone.
Story.
You can just start with Terra Nova and enjoy all 5 books there. 4 books, excuse me.
4 books.
Yep.
5 questions. 3, sir.
Rick, you've had a fairly recent release, haven't you?
I had the series I'm collaborating on with Pacey Holden, that came out Tuesday, book 4 in that. I also have Drop Trooper 12 coming out April 18th.
Awesome.
Nice.
Josh, do you have anything on your release calendar? I know you've got several things in the works.
The only thing, no, I've got a short story through Bane that is going to be in Tom Kratman's Terra Nova. Again, Terra Nova. Completely unconnected, but Terra Nova anthology. I don't know. I think that's coming out this summer, but I'm not exactly sure.
Josh is going to specialize in writing Terra Nova books from now
That's
on.
right. And then Weaponized, I think, will come out this fall. It really depends on publishing schedules, but I think it'll be this fall.
Awesome. Thanks for your time, everybody. We'll see you next week.